Welcome to the GPS Training Podcast. It's our 106th episode. And this month, I've got a special guest with us, Paul Grundy, the winner of the Spine Challenger North. So welcome, Paul, to the GPS Training Podcast.
No, thanks for having me, John. Much appreciated.
First of all, congratulations on winning the Spine Challenger North. How does it feel as the champion of such a grueling race?
Well, I guess I've had a bit of time for the dust to settle with it being just over a month ago now. So I think the inevitable, I guess, physical and mental impacts of doing a race of that kind of nature, sometimes it takes your body a bit of time to return to a state of normality. So yeah, it took a little bit of time for my body to kind of get over I don't know, I guess the mental and physical fatigue, if that's what you want to call it. But yeah, it feels good. It was nice. It was nice to get the win, of course. But it was just a great experience. So
Fantastic. We'll go into more detail about the race a little bit later on, but we're going to, first of all, something that interests me is, as people may or may not know, you're the fastest known time of the Northumberland Coastal Pass. So we're up in Northumberland where GPS Training is based. So when did you get that record?
so it's a bit of an unusual one, I guess. The context is that Northumberland's kind of like a place that's pretty close to mine, my wife, and my family's hearts. Me and my wife have been going up there for probably 20 years. Don't think we've missed a year going up there. So it's always been somewhere that kind of I've enjoyed spending time. And obviously loving running and adventures. National trails have always been appealing to me, Pennine being one. And the Northumberland Coast Path was something that I talked to my wife about doing a few times. We always tend to go up there between Christmas and New Year. So I kind of thought, what no better time than to spend a day running up the course path on the last day of the year. So it was 2022, I think it
Right.
was.
Hmm.
So 31st of December. So I didn't necessarily pick the most optimal conditions, shall we say, to do it. But knowing about fastest known times and the website and how many national trails are on there, I'd had a quick look beforehand to see what the time was. The time that was the fastest time prior to my attempt was a supported time. And I looked at it and I kind of felt like it was done in summer and it was supported. So I know typically when somebody does that, you give yourself the best chance to run the fastest possible time.
Hmm.
Because, you would like to think conditions are most favourable. You've got somebody muling your stuff for you. You don't need to worry about carrying anything, filling up on supplies. You just basically hopefully go as fast as you can. So I kind of knew I probably had it up. I was up against trying to beat it, doing it in the winter, and less light, and carrying my own stuff and doing it as a self-supported attempt. Um, but equally, I kind of felt I was in decent shape, so I kind of felt like I had a good chance of beating it. I knew I could get pretty close. As it transpired, I was quite a long way ahead when I got to Sea Houses, or even Bamber, actually. I was like well ahead of my schedule. I was probably about an hour up on my own schedule, which was to try and beat it by an hour. So I kind of felt like I had loads in the bag. I felt great. And then I think I might have mentioned to you before, I got to Bemborough, turned inland over to Belford, and was confronted with much more challenging underfoot conditions, shall we
Yeah.
say, that you don't typically get on the coast. And that's one of the nuances, I guess, with the Northumberland coast path, or as it was then, because it's changed a bit now. They think they've moved it along the coast.
Mm.
And it was really hard going. I lost a lot of time, slowed down a lot. And then there's a huge forest area, which you'll be familiar with after
Yeah.
Belford, which had been impacted by the storms that they'd had that year. So there was a lot of like felled and fallen trees, and it hadn't been cleared. So it meant kind of negotiating those just meant you weren't moving as efficiently. So yeah, I kind of got to Fenwick and then back onto the coast at Lindisfarne, and I kind of looked at my watch and I knew I was kind of like getting a bit tight around the time. So I kind of had to push on that last section up to Berwick, and still felt like I had decent legs. I was still going well. So yeah, I think I managed to get it in about 40 minutes in the end. I think it turned out.
So what time did you do in the end? What was the full length?
It was about 9 hours, roughly
Right.
9 hours. I can't remember the
Fantastic.
exact time.
Yeah.
I should know really, but it's been a few years since then. So yeah, it's around 9 hours, I think.
Very
I do
good.
think I do think I kind of thought about maybe having another go. and seeing if I could go faster. It's one of those things that we go up there so often, it's
Yeah,
tempting just to go again, because there's a couple of things I could have done a bit different, I think, and
yeah.
improved. Um, and maybe doing it during the summer, maybe having a go, going up in the summer, having a go in better conditions. I don't know whether I could go much faster, but probably could.
Do you
Don't
think you
know.
could do it faster from north to south or not? Or
It was funny because I thought about that. I thought about the best way to do it. That year we stayed in Craster.
yeah.
So it meant it was a bit easier to get to Cresswell than
Hmm.
go up to Berwick. And I'd also looked at wind direction as well, because obviously that plays such a huge part in it. If you can get, a favourable wind, it helps a lot. There's nothing worse than, trudging into a headwind all day. It really it's as much as it's physically demoralising, it's mentally demoralising. So I don't think it was particularly windy that day, but it was definitely it was more favourable than not.
Hmm.
Um, so I think in answer to your question, do I think it'd be fast? Could you go faster north to south? I think you could, if it was still the same course path officially, i.e.
Hmm.
going through Belford. I think getting that out of the way on fresher
Yeah,
legs would be better.
yeah.
Um, on reflection now, I think I would probably prefer that. And I don't think there's much of an advantage of doing it either direction. It's not like, there's particularly steeper or more technical
No.
climbs or descents, whichever way you do it. So maybe the advantage would be just to get that inland section out of the way earlier,
Hmm.
would be my,
Hmm.
my thinking. And obviously the underfoot conditions were better. Then, yeah, I think it probably would be maybe a bit quicker north to south,
Hmm.
maybe. I don't
Very
know.
good.
It's probably one way to find out. Give it a go, isn't
Well,
there?
because the bit after Amble, the last bit down after Amble is fairly easy to navigate, easy flat, a lot is along the beach and things. So again, on tired legs, hopefully be a lot quicker on that section rather than the bit around Berry. It's not too bad anyway, is it? On the cliff top, it's not too bad at
It
all.
isn't. It isn't too bad. I think that there's that section where you go around the wetlands,
Hmm.
where
Yeah, just after
Lindisfarne is, and
Holy
it
Hand. Yeah,
is.
yeah, yeah.
It's pretty tricky that bit. That's
Hmm.
and it was because I was doing it in winter. I only had like 7 days worth of daylight, so I started at 6 a.m. So I knew I was going to start in the dark.
Yeah,
But my plan was to have the dark. I wanted to finish before it went dark. That was my
yeah.
plan, and to have the time when I was fresh and I also knew from having read up about some of the sections I'd never been on before that the southern section is a little bit easier to nav than
Hmm.
the northern section.
Yeah,
So again, I was thinking do that in the dark. When
yeah.
you've got your head torch on, it's a bit easier. Um, but yeah, so as it turned out, I did finish just as it was going dark, so it worked. It worked well, but yeah, I can definitely see the advantage of doing that southern section at the end when you're tired, because I think you
Yeah.
could definitely be moving a bit better.
Hmm.
So
Brilliant. People don't know the fastest known time is a website, as you rightly say, Paul, where people list the fastest known time on all the long distance trails. So it's very competitive, and I know a lot of the ultra runners, yeah, benchmark themselves and go out and whatever the conditions, winter conditions and summer conditions, to get those fastest known times. So it's good to know that you've done on a local one. So let's go back to the Pennine Way then. So I think you started on the Pennine Way many years ago. Did you walk part of it with your father? Did you, or did you run sections of it with your father? Or have I read that?
yeah, yeah. So we I guess that my history with the Pennine Way goes back a long way, really. I mean, to when I was a child, really. Like my dad was an avid walker, mountaineer, and I kind of was brought up, pretty much most of my weekends when I was younger. If I wasn't doing a sport, um, I was out walking with my dad, learning how to look after myself, be self sufficient, enjoy being in the outdoors, learning to navigate. He taught me lots of things like the basics from a very young age. So yeah, we walked the Pennine Way, me, my dad, my brother, and a couple of my dad's friends. I think it was back in '96. I think it
Okay.
was.
Yeah, yeah.
So that was like my first real experience of it, and we did it as kind of like a bit of a supported piece. So like my mum and one of my dad's friends' wives helped out, and it meant that we didn't need to carry our tents and kind of at the end of the day we had like a motor home caravan to sleep in, which worked really well. So yeah, we did it over 12 days, I think it was, and that was my first experience of the Pennine Way. Not that I remember an awful lot of it, because I was pretty young then. I think I was like maybe 30, 12, 13, something like that. And then kind of after that, I suppose it was more just like intermittent, really. Because once it was really only when I got into my 20s that I kind of like, maybe my late 20s actually, that I kind of got into running a bit more, um, and got quite an obsessive personality. And when I tend to put my mind to something, I can't just do it half-hearted. So I kind of like found the appeal of ultra running, which then inevitably means you spend a bit more time off piste, shall we say,
Mm.
and gravitate into, the national parks or national trails. So yeah, dip in and out of going on the Pennine Way, amongst doing other things, like local. I'm quite lucky really. I live in the northwest near Preston, so quite lucky we got Rivington and the West Pennines on our doorstep. So I'm quite accustomed to, I guess, the boggy moorlands that you find on the Pennine Way, which perhaps helped me in the race. I suspect it probably did because I spent a lot of my training on there. So yeah, that's been kind of my history with the Pennine Way. Really, just it started and the spark fired from then. Really,
Did you continue from the age of 20 running, or did you have a break and come back to it a little bit later on? Or is it something you've always done all through your
no,
adult
not
life,
really.
really?
And no, I was more in. I was involved in a lot of like team sports when I was younger. And I got quite lucky really to compete at a decent level in a number of different sports. Um, and I probably went through a phase in my 20s, probably like a lot of people of my age demographic did, where you kind of got into going out and clubbing and drinking. And I suppose I probably let myself go a little bit, shall we say. Lost a
Mm.
lot of fitness, didn't really look after myself. And then when my wife got pregnant with our first daughter, I think I kind of had a bit of an epiphany that actually, if I want to be a good dad, I need to be a bit more physically fit and able, shall we say. So I kind of went a bit full circle, really. It was a bit weird. And I ended up, again, because I don't do things by halves, I tend to jump in the deep end with stuff. The Ironman UK is based in Bolton, and it has been
Right.
for about 15 years now. And I'd watched it and thought, I'll just do that. I've never done a triathlon before, but I just entered the Ironman in 2014. So that was really the catalyst for getting into endurance racing, I think. I trained for Ironman UK in 2014. And then after I'd done that, as much as I enjoyed the bike and the swim, I always had a history of being in the outdoors,
Mhm.
and I love running. So I kind of was like, right, well, what's the next thing? And I entered an ultra in the Lake
So is this about
District.
2014 then, is it?
This is
Or
2014, yeah. So
14,
back in
2015? Yeah, yeah.
2014, I did my very first ultra, which was the Tour de Helvellyn,
Okay.
in the Lake District, ordered by, I think it's Nav4, who run it. That was like 38 miles, and that was my very first one, and it was brutal. It was hard. It was winter, but it kind of, I suppose, a combination of my experience of being out in the outdoors as a child, yeah, kind of with my dad, and then my first introduction to ultra running being the Tour de Helvellyn in winter.
Mm.
I think the two things kind of like seem to meet quite nicely, and I think that sparked the bug really to then pursue running a bit more seriously, and specifically like ultra and mountain running. So it was a bit weird, really, because I never really did any. Lots of people, they'll start off and they'll be like middle distance cross country runners, fast 5Ks, 10Ks, track runners, and then as you get older, you tend to like you
Go to
lose the
longer distance.
speed
Yeah, yeah.
and you chase the endurance, shall we say? Whereas it's a bit weird with me because I'd not done any of the middle distance, short distance stuff when I was younger because I was involved in team sports. So I kind of almost missed that and just went straight to ultra distance stuff. So yeah, I did a few more races kind of like beginning of 2015. Did Lakeland 50, which was my first big UK ultra in July 2015. And did really well there. That was like I came third, which like
Brilliant.
I had no expectations. Lots of like it's one of these big ultra races, and then that I suppose at that point it was like I might actually be all right
Mhm.
at this kind of thing. Um, and it went from there really. I did a few more. I never won a race. I was getting close. I got quite competitive in a few races, but never quite got it over the line. Um, and then I got injured in 2018. I tore my meniscus in my knee, and had a bit of a decent layoff. Um, and then kind of after that, I joined. I decided to join a running club
Right.
because I was kind of like, you know what, actually being around other people who were of a similar mindset, it'll probably help me push on a bit and maybe find the bit that I'm missing to get a win, get it over the line, sort of thing. So I joined Horwich RMI, which is a local fell running club, and kind of got a big, they got a lot of history in the fell scene. And it kind of wanted to be part of a club that was a fell running club, not a road running club, because that's where my passion was, to be in the hills and the mountains. And they've got some like fantastic runners of all kind of different ages. So I kind of got involved there and started to realise I was okay at the short stuff as well, because we'd go and do training sessions on a Tuesday night. And, as much as I had all this like long distance experience, 50 miles, 60 miles, I'd never done a 5K before.
Yeah, yeah.
So they were doing some of them were doing like 5K specific sessions, or they'd be doing training for cross country. And I was like hanging with the guys at the front, even though I'd never done it before. So they were like, you need to go and do a 5K. So like I entered a Mid Cheshire, one of the big 5Ks in the Northwest, the Mid Cheshire 5K, without really much of any expectations, and run like sub 16 minutes. So I run like 15:45, I think it was, 15:46 for 5K. So it was a bit weird again. So I did it backwards. I did the longer stuff, then did some shorter stuff. And there's a bit of a joke actually amongst all the guys who I train with. I'm kind of like, I'm great up to like 5K. I'm really good at like 50 miles and above, but the stuff in between, I've not quite found. I don't know. I've not quite found exactly how to quite get it right.
Yeah.
So if I try a 10K, I don't seem to. My 5K time doesn't extrapolate to my 10K time,
okay, right.
or a half marathon or a marathon.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I don't have a massive I don't feel a huge urge to do stuff like that.
Yeah.
I think I've done a couple of 5Ks and then I'm a little bit like, yeah, I've done that now. Give me something ridiculously long. So
was the spine race something that you had thought about or been on your agenda, that you'd looked at for years, or just stumbled across the Spine Challenge North that you did first of all, or you've done first of all, or was it something that, say, you just stumbled across? Was it something you planned to do in a cycle of races?
So I think I was aware of the spine probably from probably around 2016, 2017, right. I think. So probably, I think, is it maybe 15 years that it's been going roughly?
I think it's about that time, yeah. It is 15. That time, yeah.
So it's perhaps maybe like, when it was relatively still, probably nowhere near as followed, yeah. and the appeal that it's got now. And I think I would watch it every year. I would watch. I say watch. I mean follow dots every year.
Yeah.
And always said like, I'd love to do it. I want to be on the other side. I want to be doing this race. And again, because of the my history with it with my dad, and my dad passed away 8 years ago. So kind of felt like I wanted to do it almost as a challenge for myself, but also kind of in recognition of having walked it with my dad. So. That was like my motivation for it as much as anything. And I talked about it with my wife, but it's such a huge commitment.
It is.
To train for you, or yourself, you haven't done it. It's not necessarily the full distance. I mean, full distance is just ridiculous. But even like the Challenger North or the South, I mean, you can't. You've got to treat them as challenging as the full distance, really, because winter miles on the Pennine Way, 100 miles is a serious amount of training that's needed. So it was always trying to be able to say that I could find the time to commit to it and do it justice. And that's hard, when I've got a full-time job, I've got a wife who's got a full-time job, I've got 2 daughters who've got lots of, they've got hobbies and commitments and stuff. So, if you, for me, having an addictive personality and not wanting to do it by halves, I'm kind of all in sort of thing, which means, from a training perspective, I had to invest an awful lot of time training at unsociable hours just to get the time on my feet in more than anything. Which in a way was a bit unusual. I think it actually worked to my advantage because I was inevitably spending most of my evenings during the week. I was going out at 10, 11 o'clock at night sometimes with my head torch on and training around Rivington, And yes, I knew the trails like the back of my hand. I've run them that many times. it's still actually very it's transferable to what you're going to do and what you're going to experience on the spine. So I think it probably actually benefited me doing it, training it when I did.
Yeah, no, it's right. It's like listening. It's like looking at myself in a mirror because it's exactly the same when I've done these events where I did a lot of my training at nights and things. And it is that commitment. You know, I've said in the podcast before, and people will see sick of me saying this. It's that commitment to like the sacrifice that your family goes through because actually you're away training, you're away, doing your silly 70, 80 mile training walks and this kind of thing in my case. And is that,
Yeah,
is that sacrifice of like, oh, by the way, this weekend you're not going to see me all because I'm going to go and do this. Drop me off here at 6 o'clock at night, pick me up at 4 o'clock the following afternoon, and I'll be in bed till 2 o'clock the following morning. So I
it
totally
is.
understand where that comes from. Yes.
And it's funny because when you say it out loud to people who are outside of your bubble as well, it just sounds ridiculous. I remember people at work they'd be saying to me, "Well, you might like." I think we had a Christmas do like last year in Manchester, and we went to the comedy store somewhere, and I was chatting to some of the guys who were in our team, and I was like, "Oh yeah, when I get home after this, I'm going to get my trainers and go for a run." And they were like, "What? Like you for real?" I was like, "Yeah."
Yeah, that's
You
it.
know,
I have to do
they're the
like I leave it.
sacrifices
Yeah,
you make.
leave it like I finish work on a Friday, go home, and then go out for a walk at like 7 o'clock at night in winter when it's pitch black, and then come back at like 2 o'clock in the morning or something. And like people go, "What?" You think, well, there's no other time to do it really, And then I've done it. At least then it's just the same as when we go out on a night out on a Saturday on a Friday night. But you
Exactly,
come
and
home
it's
and go to bed, and you wake up the next morning, you get on with your life because you've got to get on with your life, don't you?
and I think the brilliant thing about that is that you are forced to do that because of your own your
Yeah,
work life balance anyway. But actually, for a race like the Spine, it lends itself so well to equip yourself with that experience. Because they say that if you want to do well in a race, you've got to train specifically for it for any
yeah,
race,
yeah,
and specificity is as important as anything. And I knew full well training for something like the Spine, having not had any experience doing many winter races of that kind of nature. I wanted to give myself the best possible chance, but I also know that even not having done one of those races, you can be the fittest person, but it isn't the fittest person who always wins that race. It's because it's not like going running a marathon,
no,
or running even some 50 milers. There's so many other variables that will actually control that are in your control, but you can very easily get wrong. And if you get them wrong, even a small error can have massive implications. And I was
yeah,
really acutely aware of that. And one of the things that I was really particular about was that, yes, I want to get myself in really good physical shape, but I knew that it wasn't just about that. I had to be very aware and understanding what my kit was, what worked, what didn't work. Navigation was a critical component of it, and all of those things. Kind of, I really focused on them as well, and I think it was a combination of everything that actually meant that I was successful. Because I think if you can bring those two things together, the fitness and the physical element of it with the competency and ability to be, reactive, then that's almost like that's like the sweet spot almost.
And did you play through scenarios before the race, or do you just go out in the race and do it? Do you, because I suppose you knew the Pennine Way, so do you mentally break that down and think about, oh, well, this is a better section now, or do you think of those scenarios before the race, or do you just manage that as you go through the event itself?
Yeah, it's a good that's a good question, and it's probably going to go against what I just said to you before about being really prepared for it. So I think the one thing that I wasn't massively able to do before it was find the time to get on the Pennine Way
Right.
as much as I would have liked. And again, that's for all the reasons we were talking about before, just family commitments and the logistics of actually something I hadn't thought about was that obviously if you want to go and give yourself a day to go and recce one part of it, ideally you want to make the most of that and you want to do it as a point to point,
Yeah.
A to B. And to do that, well, you've got to think logistically, how do I make that happen? So if you're on your own, drive your car somewhere, and then if you want to run 30 miles, once you get 30 miles north, how do you get back to your car?
Yeah.
And then I was like, well, I could just run 10 miles out and 10 miles back, but then you're only seeing 10 miles of the course,
Yeah.
and you're doing half of it not in the direction that you're actually going to be doing it in the race.
Yes.
So I think, in a way, what I was quite to what I managed one recce of the
Right.
course, which was the
Wow.
section I was recommended to do, which was the Alston to Bellingham
Yeah.
section.
Yeah.
And I was quite lucky really because one of the guys from Horwich who I train with, he works with a guy who's done really well on the full spine, Rory Harris.
Yeah.
And he put me in contact with him. He was doing the full spine this year, just gone. And kind of we made an arrangement that he was going to drive up to Bellingham in his car. I was going to go and pick him up from Bellingham, drive back to Alston, and then we'd run up, drive back afterwards. So I think, I would have liked to have done more of that, but just again couldn't fit it in. So yeah, I think that was probably the one thing that was lacking was the fact that 120 miles of that course I've never, not seen since I was, most of it I'd not seen since I was like 12-year-old.
Yeah. So it's funny things. I've thought long and hard about this because actually, is it a mindset? Actually, does people do better not knowing what's ahead, or do people do better? Because I've had this debate a lot. I'm someone who I'd say before I've done the Spine Race, Spine Challenge, the South Spine Challenge North, I've reckoned every single mile of it. I ruined my wife's holidays by saying, right, we're going to stay, we're hiring a cottage in Alston because I'm actually going to recce that 52 miles, or we're going to here and I'm going to recce this 52 miles or whatever. So I need to know it mentally as well, kind of, and then I can get to a point and go, right, I'm going to regroup here, and now I know this is an easy section, I can do this and this and do it. But I sometimes think that actually not knowing what's ahead is actually sometimes an advantage, because actually instead of going, oh, now I'm doing this, I'm going to climb and push over this section. If you didn't know it, you would think, actually, can't be much of this left, can't be much of this left. So actually, I don't know if it's a positive thing or a negative thing, but then saying that the full spine, the winners usually know the Pennine Way. I've done it a number of times because, and the more they do it, the quicker they get. So maybe I'm wrong with that one.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's definitely. I think there's a lot to be said for knowing the course and having seen it, because I played this through in my head as well a lot, and I was like, well, given 70% of this race is going to be in darkness, have I got any advantage of actually having done it if I can't see anywhere? And I kind of like played all the different scenarios through, perhaps sometimes trying to justify to myself that it was all right not having seen it, because I just wanted to, trying to seek internal reassurance almost that it was all right. I think my preference still would have been to have done more of it. I think I would have liked to have done the Cheviots before it in particular.
There's some odd sections there. Again, after you've done Windy Gyle, I don't know if you know that you cross back onto the English side, there's a paved path where actually a lot of people scramble on the Scottish side. But things like that is no local knowledge and wrecking it. You see, some people think, what are you doing? Actually, but if you don't know that there's a paved path on the English side, people do scramble along the Scottish side, don't they? So there's little things like that. Unless you've wrecked it, you don't actually know.
You just don't know. And this was the bit of like the Cheviots in particular. I think, given the state of the race that I knew it was probably likely going to be darkness, because I'd earmarked, like, again, I'd not said this to anybody before the race, but I tried to get an idea in my head based on the shape I was in, what I thought I could do.
Yeah.
And I'd looked at like previous times, but I know that with any spine race, you can't compare times from one year to another because the conditions play such a huge part of it. But I'd kind of set myself the target of saying, if I could do 48 hours, then I'll be pretty happy. Now, as it turned out, I think the conditions were probably quite a lot worse this year than what people had last year, or in some other years. People who've done it, who've done the full race or the Challenger North, and they've done it over other years, and said how in particular typical it was this year. And for different reasons, though, that it was like almost like a race of two halves, because of the way that the speed of the thaw.
I suppose that really let's go to that race then. Let's go to the race. So the first 24 hours were horrendous, weren't they? The weather you started off in, snow underfoot, the speed you were all going at was actually, I must say disastrous, but it was a very slow first 24 hours because the weather was that bad. And then everybody quickened up as this thaw, which happened in 12 hours. You went from, well, what did you go from? So that first section was bad, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. So, like, obviously, you start in hard draw and you're going up straight up Great Shunnagh Fell. And again, I've not wrecked that, but I've been up Great Shunnagh Fell. It was quite a few years ago, but I do know that hill, mountain, whatever you want to call it. And yeah, there was still a lot of snow on the ground. It wasn't particularly deep in Hard Raw, but there was still, it was white everywhere. Um, there'd been a little bit of rain, so the bits that had frozen, and then obviously you'd get a bit of rain on top. You get that like glazed finish of
Yeah,
the
yeah.
ice, and it's just lethal. So that the very first bit, as you actually before you just reach, you go up the kind of the road. It's not a road; it's more like it's a
It's a
bridleway.
track, and then
It's
it
a
turns
track
into a
bridleway,
foot. Yeah,
and then you swing to the right, and then you start the climb. That first bit was lethal.
yeah.
Like I think a couple of people had started with spikes on from the outset. I didn't.
Right.
I decided not to, um, which in hindsight I probably could have been a bit quicker, but I was working on the basis it wasn't going to be nobody's going to be going that fast anyway. And we climbed Great Shinafell, and it was deep at the top. It was like there was times where there was probably a group of about there was like 10 of us maybe
Right.
at the top of Great Shinafell, and there was times where you'd put your foot down and you'd literally just go up to your waist. It was pretty bad. And then we descended down the other side, and I wasn't pushing the pace. I wasn't even like running particularly hard. But having done like a bit of fell running and stuff, and like descending is probably one of my strengths. And we got to the bottom and hit the road, and I turned around and I was on my own,
Wow.
and I was like, and I couldn't see anybody, and I wasn't expecting that. I thought it'll come back together again. Well, it obviously never did. I then spent 47 hours, 46 hours on my own, pretty much. But that first bit, so from there, and then where you traverse. I'm not entirely sure what basically that section after Great Shinafell to Tan Hill
Yeah,
was really
yeah.
hard, and I
It's quite
think
high that section. People don't realize you do a fair bit climbing, and yeah, it's quite high, isn't it?
it's
It's
quite
up and
tricky.
yeah,
It's quite you kind of you're traversing like the valley almost that section before you climb up to Tan Hill, and because there was so much snow and it's kind of off camber, it was really tricky to negotiate it without constantly slipping and falling over, and ended up on your backside. And I did a couple of times. And then after you kind of cross over the river, you
yeah,
start to climb up to Tan Hill. I
yeah.
mean, it was absolutely brutal going up there.
Hmm.
That's when I think I really realised what I'd let myself in for. But I looked round a couple of times, and bear in mind, it was only like what maybe a couple of 2 to 3 hours into the race, and
Yeah,
I
yeah.
was like,
That's all.
I'd
Yeah,
already created a gap that I just thought would come back to. I wasn't, you know, I'd, I went into the race thinking I'm just gonna I've got when I train, and I train hard and I run
mm,
hard. I don't do lots of like what I call junk miles.
hmm,
A lot of my runs, they are there's intent to them and intensity to them. They still focus on building aerobic conditioning, but I do like to run quite hard. And I wasn't pushing my limits, and I was keen not to run too hard because I thought if I run like I do in training, I'll just blow up. But so I thought my intention was to, sit back a bit, stay away
hmm.
from the front group, and hopefully, reel people in,
Yeah,
as they
yeah.
say, as you're doing a race. Never expected what happened to happen because I
Hmm.
wasn't really pushing too hard. I was well within my comfort zone. And I got up to Tan Hill, and it was like pretty
Hmm.
brutal. And I think I can't remember. I think somebody might have shouted something. I didn't quite get exactly understand, but they said you may be like 10, 15 minutes in front of second place.
Right.
Um, and again, so I didn't really, what are you, maybe like 3 hours into the race at that
Yeah, yeah.
point, something like that. And then I think it was really that next section that was possibly the hardest bit of the entire race.
It's horrible that bit after Tan Hill. So wet, it's just boggy across the top there. It's the worst section in the whole of the world, isn't it? It's just awful. I've done it a number of times, and I just sit there going, "You're up to your waist in bog
There
even
was
at the
no
best of
path.
time." No.
There was so much snow
Yeah.
down. There was that you couldn't see the bog because it
Yeah.
was so deep in snow, and the posts that they've got driven into the ground
Yeah.
to obviously allow people to
Guide you.
navigate
Yeah.
the path. You couldn't see them. It was that deep. So I think had it been the day before,
Yeah.
that layer on top would have been frozen solid,
Yeah.
and it
Yeah.
would have been like running on a solid on like tarmac almost. But because even just in that 24 hours, the
Hmm.
thaw had already started. And by the time we got there, as soon as you put your foot on it, you were straight through the top, and then it was, well, you know what the posts are like. They probably what
Mm,
4 foot.
hmm.
So there was times where it was going. There was a couple of times just in that section where I was like up to my chest in snow, and I was thinking, like, I knew obviously I was always as it turned out, ended up being the furthest north on the entire
Yeah.
course all the way through the race. So I know they call it like breaking trail. But all I was thinking to myself is, how are the people who are shorter than me going to cope over this section? Because I'm like 6'2",
Yeah.
and it was like up to here on me.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
thinking people are going to be like over the shoulders
Do you know, it's
in
funny that
snowdrift.
you say this. I walked when I did the Spine Challenge in North. I did it with a girl called Cleo, who actually did your event this winter as well. So she went back. So I was following her, and she finished the whole race exactly the same time she did the summer event. But
Wow.
that first section, she was literally 4 or 5 hours behind herself. So it shows how slow she was through that first 24 hours with
Yeah.
the weather so bad. And she's not very tall. She's quite a dainty, fit young girl actually, but she was 4 or 5 hours behind, if not back. And I thought, it must be really hard because I say I walked the whole event with her, and then she caught up and caught up. So it made me realize how much better it got. Because I say she was Tan Hill, what, a couple of hours behind where she was in summer. And I thought,
Yeah.
well, it's not that far into that event, and she was so much so. So it made me realize how bad the conditions were compared to what it
I
has been
think
in the past.
I think all the way to Alston, it was like
Right?
that. It wasn't as bad as that. That was probably the worst of it, I would say. There was a couple of sections where it was a little bit ropey, but certainly as you move north, it definitely lessened in terms of there weren't as many snow drifts
Yeah.
anyway that were as deep as that. Um, it was funny because I got to get into I mean the section along to Langdon Beck
Yeah.
to Middleton was, that was pretty ropey along the river there, because it
Okay.
was
Right.
it was starting to go dark just as I got there.
Yeah.
And it was like glass in places. It was lethal. I had to be really careful.
Did you have
um,
spikes on or not, or did you just run with your trainers? No.
so I just run with my trainers up to Langdon Beck, and then I will probably talk about the bit that came after it, where I made my nav error. But
Yeah,
anyway,
I'm
so
gonna. Yeah, is this the 38-minute penalty that we're going to talk about? Is it?
yeah, we'll talk about that in a minute. So I pride myself in my ability to navigate as well. So I was a bit that was a frustration, but yeah. So I'd decided not to put my coils on at all. I had a pair of spikes as well, like Nortec spikes, in my drop bag, because I didn't know whether I'd want them for that. The section that made me the most nervous, having not wrecked it, was obviously Langdon Beck to Alston, and
Yeah.
going over High Cup Nick, over Crossfell, and not knowing how severe the conditions might be. And having seen what it was like over Great Shunner Fell, even though the snow was definitely not as bad as we went further north, I knew it'd still be pretty bad on top of Crossfell.
Mhm.
So I ummed and ahed, and I got to Langdon Beck, and I decided I was just going to put my coils on.
Right.
Which I did, and I left the spikes in my bag, which was I think was the right decision as it turned out. But what I think one of the things that I did do that was probably one of the best decisions I made, was I swapped to my mountaineering jacket when I got to Langdon Beck. I left my running waterproof, which I'd used for the first 40 miles, put that back into my drop bag, and I put it on straight away, because I thought, I'm going straight up onto High Cup
Mm.
Nick. It's going to be cold tonight. I checked I knew the forecast was going to drop, and I just know how important it is to keep your core temperature well regulated for that section that would inevitably be pretty slow. Um, and it worked. It worked brilliantly,
Mm.
really, because I was able to keep myself apart from the penalty, but I kept warm. I kept it on all the way over High Cup Nick. And then just as I was about halfway down the descent into Dufton, I took it off, put it into my pack, and then I left it off for the climb up
Up
onto the initial
cross.
ridge. And then when
Yeah.
you hit the ridge, again, I could have not put it on. But this is, again, when I was saying about you make these little decisions
Yeah.
and how important they can be, I knew at that point I didn't need to be putting that jacket on. But I also knew what the next 2 hours I had potentially were going to be like in store. And I thought, actually, just do it now.
Yeah.
So I stopped. I took my pack off, put the jacket on, put my pack back on, and then I carried on over like Little Dun, Great Dun, and Crossfell. And again, it was a brilliant. It was probably one of the best decisions I made. That, you know, so how I played that section, apart from the penalty, I actually think that was probably one of the main reasons I had such a good race,
Mm.
um, because I
So,
got it right on that bit.
so we're going to talk about the penalty. So did you not take the diversion at Cauldron Snout? Did you stick to the main trail then? But that's surely the
Yeah,
hardest part because why,
that's what everybody. That's what everybody
why?
said to me.
So why did you not do the road diversion? That's flat and straight. Why did you go
Oh,
along the riverside and clamber up Cauldron Scout covered in ice, which you're not supposed to because it's freezing cold? So why? How? What went wrong there?
so yeah, so I got in, and it was funny
You
because
weren't the only person I see. There's quite a few people
I
who did it,
wasn't. Well,
didn't they?
John Kelly did it as
He
well,
did.
and
He did.
John messaged me afterwards. I was messaging him about. Well, I messaged him about it and said like, yeah, he did the same as me. His circumstances were a little bit different to mine. But yeah, it was really funny. Well, it wasn't funny. It was far from funny. So obviously, I was at Langdon Beck, and they were very, because I was the first person at these checkpoints. They couldn't do enough for me. You get in
No.
there, and they're like,
Mhm.
you know, you're the first person they've seen, and they were absolutely brilliant. And a lady came to me, she said, "Listen, just letting you know that the Cauldron Snout diversion is in force, so you need to take the road." Now, I'd not reckoned it, and I can't even remember what Cauldron Snout looked like, if I'm absolutely honest, from when I did it when I was a kid. So I kind of left there. And as I left, the other 4 or 5 guys who were like behind me, they were coming in. So I knew they were about an hour behind me at that point. I'd built
Mhm.
about an hour's lead. Um, and stupidly, so on my 2nav rock,
Mhm. It's a
the
great device, yeah.
GPS device that I used. So I'd watched one of Andy's videos where
Yeah.
he'd shown how you can have the full route on map, and
Yeah.
then you can actually display
Yeah.
the other
Exactly right.
routes
Yeah. Yeah.
and order them and give them different colours.
Yeah.
So I had it on that device with all of the diversions pre-loaded as part of the activity I was recording. And I tested it in training, and I was like, all good with it. I knew it worked. And I thought that's a really cool feature. And I love tech because I'm a data guy. I'm a data engineer. That's what I do for a living. Love data, love all that sort of stuff. So I pride myself in, knowing how to do that and do it well. And that was the irony of it, because the other thing I should have done is I was also had it on my Suntour watch, the route.
Hmm.
Now, to switch the GPX, you can't have multiple routes loaded on your watch. You can't on any real wearable device like you can on a handheld. So you've got to literally turn one navigation GPX off and put a different one on. So when I was sat in the little vestibule area ready to leave Langdon Beck,
Yeah. Yeah.
what I should have done is I should have switched it on my watch to the Cauldron Snout diversion, but I left it on the main one, and I had my 2nav rock on a little tether in my
Right.
top pocket of my race vest, and I left the checkpoint with the full route still on my watch, which obviously followed the path, the
Yeah.
main Pennine Way along the river and up Cauldron Snout. And for whatever reason, they'd obviously put signs out, but as with any of these signs, they rely on, because they use the reflective stuff
Yeah.
on them. They rely on your head torch hitting them so you actually see them. And I don't know how I missed it, but I clearly, obviously, did. Whether I was just looking at my watch or not, didn't see it. I totally missed the sign. And because I hadn't told my 2nav rock that I was going to take that route. It was just there as the option,
Yeah.
so I could follow it if I needed to. So it didn't notify me and say
Yeah.
you need to
You've taken
turn
one. Yeah.
here.
Hmm.
My watch didn't, because I've not switched it onto the other one, and I hadn't seen the sign. So I just carried on,
Did
head
you
down.
realize? Did you realize you had gone wrong or not? Did you, or did you just think, oh, that was a route? Did you ever
Well,
realize?
I realized when I got to the river, and I was like, I definitely should be by the river.
Right. Okay.
And then
Yeah.
obviously you then, as you'll know, that
Yeah. There's
section you're
nothing you can do.
clambering over the boulders,
Yeah.
and I stopped and I pulled the 2nav out, and I realized then I was like, yeah, I should be up there. So I undernad, I thought, should I go back? And I played out in my head, the likelihood is I'm going to get penalised for it. But I also knew I was a decent way in front already at that point. So I thought, you know what, it's going to be, by the time I turned round, I reckoned, I worked out, I reckon I was probably halfway along the section, because I was
Mm-hmm.
already at the boulders.
Right.
So I thought, to go back and a penalty and go round, I don't know, I might end up worse off.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
actually, I think I was so far along the boulders, I was like, I'm committed now. I may
You're
as well just carry on.
you're not that far off the snout at that point, are you? Really,
No,
you might as well just keep
I
going.
could hear it. I could
Yeah,
hear it as well. So I was kind of like, right, I may as well just do it and clamber up. So I did, got up there and then realized and carried on. And it was only because I mustn't have had a signal on my phone. It was only after I'd gone over High Cup Nick and descended into Dufton that my phone must have picked up a signal. And a text message came through from HQ saying, we've seen you've missed the diversion. So it was at the point actually that I'd stopped to take my jacket off and put it into
right.
my
Yeah,
pack.
yeah, yeah.
And I pulled the phone out. So I replied to them and said, listen, I'm really sorry. Total error on my part. I got to Dufton. Nobody at Dufton mentioned it to me there. So whether they weren't aware, I'm not sure, or whether they didn't
Mm,
want to tell me. And it was only when I got to Greg's hut, John Bamber told me
yeah,
and said, you're going to be given a penalty for it. And it was when I got to Ulster, Nikki, who's one of the race directors, she was kind of following me all the way up the course. And she asked me, she just said, listen, Paul, like, did they tell you? And I said, yeah, they did. You know, I'm not going to tell you they didn't tell me that. They told me, and it was my error, my mistake. So, you know, whatever, I accept any penalty you give me. So she explained that what they did is they effectively worked out that I was 19 minutes. When did they say 19 minutes? Yeah, it must have been 19 minutes faster
yeah,
than the guys who were behind me, the group of them that
yeah.
had gone round the road by me tip, which I was a bit like, how did I manage to do that 90 minutes faster? Because it's so much more technical. I'd have loved to run along the road. I'd have been
Yeah,
like,
that's what I'm
I'd have been in
saying.
my element. I think it's about half a mile further, but
Yeah.
obviously I mean,
It's hard
the
that
time
section. Yeah,
difference.
yeah. The hard section that you went on of those boulders. It's hard enough when the dry. Never mind when they're frozen and cold. It must have been horrendous that
Well,
section.
and she did. So she said to me, listen, the way that we have to do it is you gained an advantage of 19 minutes. So to make it a penalty to
Hmm.
you for doing it, we have to double it.
Yeah.
So that's where the 38 came from. And I was like, you know what? So be it. It's
Hmm.
fine. You know, I'll just carry on. And I wasn't at any point, even at Alston, I never even asked how far in front I was. I
Yeah.
don't think I asked at any point of the race how far in front I was. It was only at Bellingham when I was told I was like 13 miles ahead that I realised, crikey,
Yeah. You done
I've
well.
really opened up a bit of a gap.
Mhm. So how quick and out were you out the checkpoints? We mentioned checkpoint one about an hour. How did you sleep or at any of the checkpoints or not? Or did you sleep all during the race or
No, I didn't sleep.
wow.
And that was again, before the race, it was something I didn't know because I've never done a race of that distance before. And part of the reason for doing the Challenger North was because my aspirations have always been to do the full spine. And that's the one. That's the one I really, really want to do, and I want to do well at. Which sounds a bit ridiculous now, having done the North and done so well, but that's always been my goal.
Hmm.
And I wanted to go into that full spine attempt, having got some experience behind me. So I thought, well, there's no better way to do that than to do the Challenger North.
Hmm.
Um, so part of the thinking behind how I was going to approach the strategy of the North was really about learning what I might be able to tolerate from a sleep perspective.
Yeah.
So I'd kind of made a decision, regardless of how the race was going, I would just go on feel,
Right.
basically. There was at any point where I actually felt, I think I might have mentioned this to you when we spoke before, but I think there was maybe the two nights. So normally, like my body clock, it's normally I go to bed between 9 and 10 o'clock most nights.
Hmm.
And what I found is that between that time on the first day and between that time on the second day, probably for about a 2 hour period between 9 and 11 o'clock at night, I felt tired, like I
Yeah.
wanted to sleep. But as soon as it got past 11 o'clock,
Wow.
I felt fine.
Fantastic.
It was almost like I'd missed my window to go to sleep. And
Yeah.
my body was like, well, you're not going to bother now. So we'll
Yeah.
go back to normal and carry on.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, that was, I didn't sleep. And then checkpoints wise, how long did I spend there? I think one of the learnings I would probably now, again, this was part of the process of
Hmm.
learning and figuring out what I could do better. I think I probably spent 45 minutes at Langdon
Yeah.
Beck,
Right.
45 minutes at Alston,
Yeah.
and then probably an hour, maybe just
Bellingham.
over an hour at Bellingham.
Hmm.
So, and I could definitely have spent less time at those.
Which was the best food then? That's the big question.
Well, I mean,
Do you have
them noodles,
lasagna at Alston, did you?
them noodles that John Bamber made me at,
Oh,
uh, uh,
at
um,
at
uh, The
Or
what's
was
it
it?
called? I got
Yeah,
Crossfell. I can't remember what
yeah.
the hut. They've got a name for it, haven't they? I
I
can't
know
remember what it's
exactly
called.
what it's called now. Yeah.
But yeah, once I got into the hut there, because obviously that section was brutal going over there. It really was. And yeah, their noodle. I mean, he could have given me anything, to be honest with you. It wouldn't matter what he'd have fed me, and I thought it was
Yeah.
amazing. I suppose that's one of the brilliant things about doing something like the spine. It doesn't matter
Yeah.
what, anything tastes good when you're that hungry and that
Greg's
tired.
Hut. Greg's
Greg's
Hut.
Hut,
That's
flipping
it.
it, yeah, Greg's Hut. So when I got to Greg's Hut, yeah, so they were good. The lasagna, I had 2 portions of lasagna, um, which was very good. I'd heard
In
lots of good
Alston.
stories about
Yeah.
lasagna, so that was good. Um, what did I have at Langdon Beck? Langdon Beck had a jacket potato with cheese. They did offer me a curry, which
I
I've
had a
been
curry.
told
I had a
was
curry there. Yeah. So I had a little
they
curry.
offered it to me, and I thought it could go
It could
one or
go
two
either way.
ways.
This. Yeah.
And I was kind of like, do I want to take the risk? And I thought I'll just have a jacket potato and cheese,
Yeah.
please. So I just had jacket potato and cheese there, which was great. It was fine. Um, Again, I didn't, in a way, I kind of, sometimes it's easy on these things to reflect and go, oh, well, I could have been 15, 20 minutes faster at those two, and I could have been half an hour faster at Bellingham. That would have been an hour quicker. It's easy sometimes to look back at these things and think, oh, I could save myself an hour quite easily. But actually, you know, if I'd have gone out of there faster, I might not have had as much respite, and I might not have been as efficient. And actually, the net impact of it might not have been. It might have resulted in a slower time.
Yeah. Do you know, I've
So
thought long and hard about this checkpoints. How long you stay at checkpoint does not reflect on your finishing time. And it's funny this because actually,
yeah,
after Alston,
it's a
there
good
was
point.
there was 4 of us together came into Alston, and one of the ladies that I was with left an hour before the rest of us. She was fed up about it, waiting for everybody, and she just left. And we had to caught her up by Hadrian's Wall again. And
Wow.
that for me, I kind of went, that's for her on her own at the front, well, ahead of us. 3 of us could bring it, reel her in as such. And I thought it was quite an interesting fact, really, because she was fit, she was super fit. No, there's nothing wrong with this lady, but actually had that mentality of being on her own at the front with 3 of us behind. We had an extra hour at the checkpoint, we could gain that time. So I've thought long and hard about this, but I think stopping at checkpoint for a good time to recover and regroup is actually not, it's time well spent, I
Yeah,
think.
and not rushing as well, and
Yeah.
I think that's what I never did at any of them, because even I mean a lot of the people commented at like how, and it was even after the race, like how like calm and relaxed I was at the things. But then again, because like it's funny, I've done lots of races where you're racing hard at the front and you're like looking over your shoulder, whereas I never felt that with that race. I
Hmm.
felt really relaxed during the
Hmm.
entire of it, and what they give me the penalty, it didn't bother me mentally,
Hmm.
psychologically, whereas John Kelly talked a lot of it, and it was different for their race because him and Kim were so close at that point. I think it really played on his mind and it impacted his thought process around making good decisions.
Hmm.
Whereas for me, I just kind of accepted it and moved on.
Hmm.
And it was the same at the checkpoints. I never felt like I rushed. I never felt like I didn't want to forget doing anything. My daughters had written me like lists of things to remember to do, and I just got those out. I followed it. So whilst yes, I probably could have spent less time there,
Yeah.
actually, I enjoyed the time at the
Yeah.
checkpoint. I enjoyed the food. I didn't feel like I rushed. And again, it would be easy to go, oh, I could do it a bit different, but would I?
Hmm.
Probably not. I think, and again, that's maybe one of the learnings I'll take.
Hmm.
For my wife was thrilled to bits to find out that I was able to guarantee myself an entry to the full spine next year because I won. So,
Yeah. Fantastic.
so that's one thing. Obviously, if health and fitness permitting, not being
Yeah.
injured, I'll be toeing the start line in January next year for the full spine, hopefully.
Fantastic. Before we move on to navigation, which is really what this podcast is about, I
Yeah, of
really
course.
is there a toughest part of the course that you thought there was, or is there a part that you really enjoyed? So, what was the toughest part? Or are we going to leave that to the end because I don't think people know what actually happened with a few miles ago. Is that going to be the toughest part? What
No,
happened?
I'd say Hadrian's
As
Wall.
well, right?
Even
Okay.
though I did it during the day, I had
Yeah.
recce it and I knew what it was. But I think recceing it when you've
With
got
fresh legs, yeah.
20 miles in your legs
Yeah.
and wrecking it with 120 miles in your legs are two
Yeah.
different things.
Yeah.
And as much as I moved pretty efficiently over there, it was it's just demoralizing.
It is.
Like I can see why so many people dread Hadrian's Wall
Yeah.
now, particularly on the full spine because you're 220 miles in at that
Yeah.
point. So
Yeah.
yeah, that was probably the hardest bit I'd say.
Right. And which is the bit that you enjoyed the most then?
Well, I genuinely enjoyed all of it.
Right.
I honestly didn't. There wasn't any point in that race where I was like, you know what, I just want this to be over with. Sometimes in races you can get like that. You just like you have really bad spells.
Hmm.
I didn't have any real low spots at
Hmm.
all. I just enjoyed it. I
Hmm.
felt great. I felt physically good. I felt like I'd made good decisions. I know it's a bit of a, I don't know, it's a bit of a cliche answer that, but I genuinely
No,
just
no,
enjoyed all of it.
no. Yeah, 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 yeah. No, at some
So
point, 'cause at some point, you just kind of think, oh, life doesn't get much better than this, does it? You're halfway through a race or something. You just feel, wow, this is what life is about. Everything's just coming together. You're ahead of where you
it
need to
did.
be, and you
It
suddenly
did.
go, yeah, this is good. This is what I expected from, or I hoped from the
Yeah,
event.
and I think leading the race helps that as well
Yeah,
because it feels like I was going into, and again I would never say this to anybody because it's not what I'm about, but I'd said to my wife, like she'd said to me, she said, "Do you think you can win?" And I said, "Well, yeah." I said, "I genuinely believe I can." I said, "I know there's a lot of good runners, a lot of people with more experience than me, but I knew I was in good shape. I knew
yeah,
I'd trained well. I'd had a very, very good 3 month training block, no injuries. I'd been doing consistently over 100 miles a week of all quality training. None of it was like junk miles, it was all quality stuff. So I knew I was in good nick. It was really just a case of like, if I can get the decision making side of it right, I knew I had the fitness. And I thought, I genuinely went into it thinking if somebody beats me from a fitness perspective, then fair play to them. I have to hold my hand up to them because I couldn't have really done much more.
yeah.
Being having a full time job and having kids, I'd been able to train really smart and really well. So yeah, I kind of felt like I had a very, very good chance.
Hmm.
But obviously, having never done it before, you just don't know. There's so many things that can happen on a race like that. But
Yeah,
yeah, so when it all came together, it felt like all the hard work, all the
yeah,
dedication, the going out at unsociable hours, all the
yeah,
training. It felt, and maybe that's why I enjoyed it so much because I
yeah.
felt like it was all worthwhile.
Yeah, yeah, that's superb. So moving on to navigation. So
Yes,
your primary source of navigation in the past has been the Sunto watch, hasn't it? Sunto vertical.
I've got both the vertical and
All
the
right.
race.
So
Yeah,
during this race, did you which of those watches did you use?
both of them.
Both of them. Okay. Right. Okay. One on
Maybe,
each wrist then or not, or no? Or
yeah,
did you
pretty
check?
much,
Yeah.
yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
you're one of those techie
So
people. Yes.
yeah, so I only did that because maybe it was me. So the race is an AMOLED screen,
Yeah.
so it has got immense battery
Hmm.
capabilities for an AMOLED screen. It was, even Garmin's equivalents, even like the Phoenix 8 now doesn't have the same level as what the Suntour race has got.
Yeah.
It's exceptional, really, that it's got the ability to you get like 50 hours basically
Yeah.
on full dual band GPS with an AMOLED screen. Now that's without the always on display on. So you
Hmm.
basically it will
Yeah.
go off when you twist your wrist down and only come on when you turn it up. But because it's an AMOLED screen, particularly when it's dark, it's
Yeah.
much easier to read than a
Hmm.
memory and pixel display like
Yeah.
the vertical. The thing with the vertical is it gives me the absolute assurance that if for some reason I ran out of battery, I knew that wouldn't.
Yeah.
So I was probably overkill, and I didn't really need to be wearing the vertical as well. But the race, it did it all, and it was just a case of topping it up as I go along.
Right.
Um, so
So that
yeah,
was just at checkpoints you topped it up, was it, or did you
yeah,
not
yeah.
not actually on the trail?
So basically at the checkpoints in my drop bag, I had just one of my I had a couple of power banks
Yeah,
basically, and I'd pre-plugged in the leads,
cables.
one
Yeah,
for my watch, one for my head torch, one for my two nav
to
rock,
nav. Hmm.
and I'd again before the race, I'd tested it in training where I'd come in from a run, and before rather than ending the activity, I came in the house, plugged them into the thing and left them for 15, 20 minutes
Yeah,
and then came back to them and they charged, did not ended the activity. Um, so I knew that it would work as a strategy that, and
brilliant.
I didn't charge the vertical. So the vertical, I just left that running on my right watch.
Yeah,
And when I finished, so bear in mind what it was like 48 hours, 47 hours, I think it was. I think I finished in. The vertical had used, I think it had used 31% of its battery.
wow, amazing, amazing.
And
That's amazing.
it was in full blown. And now I turned notifications off. It wasn't
Yeah.
connected to my watch. It wasn't connected to my heart rate monitor.
Okay.
But even so, like, I mean, it's just insane.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it?
Um,
And then going on to the Rock, then, would
mm,
you have bought a purpose-built GPS unit if you hadn't had to? Because I often think a lot with the spine races. No, we get a lot of people, oh, I'm going to buy this. I don't really want to, but it's on the kit list.
mm.
So would you have been that person if you hadn't had a GPS unit? Would you have got one for this event? I know we're going to speak. I think you thought it was a very good product afterwards, but if that event hadn't had that on the kit list, would you have got it?
Probably not, no.
Okay.
But actually, now I've got it, I think I'll use it a lot.
Yeah.
And the reason being is because I've got, that 99% of the time, right, if I go out for a run somewhere and I have to plan a route because I'm going in the lakes or I'm going up into Snowdonia, I'll basically use Strava and I'll create a route using their heat maps.
Yeah.
Snap to Trail produces a really clean GPX file, automatically appears on Sunto, and I just sync it with a watch, load it as navigation, and I'm basically following a breadcrumb trail overlaid on top of a map.
Mm.
I've had a Garmin in the past. I don't think I ever used on my Garmin Enduro. I never used the fact that it had fully routable maps on board
Right.
because I would always just load a GPX file, which I think 99% of people do.
Hmm.
I think what I've realised now, though, is having now got the 2nav, is that with it having the full OS maps 21 to 25,000 on it, actually it's like a bike computer. And I do a lot of cycling. I particularly do a lot of mountain bike riding. And I love going up to the lakes with my mountain biking and doing a day mountain biking and a day running. And I think I will now use the 2nav Rock as my primary mountain bike computer with OS maps on,
Yeah.
rather than my dedicated cycling computer, which is a Hammerhead Karoo,
Yeah.
purely because it's got the OS maps installed on it, and you can't do that on any other device, to my knowledge, other than a dedicated handheld device. So I think, yeah, I'm almost like a bit of a convert as a result
By
of
Lindley
having to
Chambers
get one
pushing you
for
into
it.
it, you see.
Yeah. And it's funny
So,
because I remember us having the conversation about it when I rung up before the race and said,
yeah.
like, I feel like my brother had a sat map and
Yeah.
he offered to lend it to me. And he gave it to me, and I was like, "Oh my god, I'm not." It was like a blooming. I mean, it
Yeah.
was like a big household brick. I was like,
It
"I'm
is.
not lugging that around with me.
Yeah.
Like, I've only got a 20-litre pack; it'll take up half my pack."
Yeah.
So I felt like it was, it was an expense that I didn't want to have to shell out for. But
Yeah.
actually, on reflection now, I don't think it is a bad. It's a good investment because I will use it for other
Mhm.
purposes, and I love the fact it's got OS maps on it.
Mhm.
It's
So how
amazing.
so during the events, how much did you use your watch compared to the Rock then? Or did you use the Rock when you got into potential problems or you doubted yourself, or did you use
Yeah,
the yeah, that's how
I
you used
did.
it. Is it?
I used it quite a bit, actually, more so than I thought. I don't know if it's because the GPX file was the one that Lindley shared with us, and
Mhm.
I'm guessing somebody has manually gone and created that. So there was inevitably periods where, with any GPX file, effectively it's a list, it's a set of points, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it will just draw a straight line between those. I know, it's really good now. Like if you go on the OS online site, they've got snap to grid
Yeah.
across the entire country, snap to trail, sorry, and that's like such a powerful feature for planning routes. But lots of the older GPX files, and perhaps this was one of them, it's still somebody's manually added
Yeah.
points, and
Mhm.
then you're relying on them getting it bang on the path. And on the watch, because you don't have the detail on there, it's brilliant, for a quick glance. But if you're just not quite sure, the reassurance of having that just to hand,
Yeah.
and the way I'd done it is, I'd use I actually managed to get hold of a little tether for it
Right.
that I connected, and there was like a loop on the inside of the top pocket of my pack, and I managed to just loop it onto that, so I knew it was going to be safe. And it was just so easy just to get it out, have a quick look. And I think one of the best features on that device is the fact that, from a battery preservation perspective, you can have it running and you can just press the
Power
top right
button. Yeah.
button. It blanks the screen, which can't be activated by any other button other than that one.
Exactly
And
right. Yeah.
and the little blue light flashes, so you know it's still recording, and it gives you the reassurance. And I just think it's a fantastic bit of kit. I really do. I'm totally like sold on it, to the point where I think I'll use it loads now, just because it's got
Fantastic.
so many cool features.
Excellent. That's good. Well, it's quite interesting because actually I had a meeting with the chief executive of TUNAV yesterday. So I was telling him I was
All
doing the
right.
interview today. So I was saying, did you realise your product was used the winner of the Spine Challenger North this year? So yeah, I'm hopefully going to meet up with him again in March. But he's quite pleased. So I think he's looking forward to hearing the interview. But yeah, I think it was nice, and it's a nice product, and it's nice that it's being used in the way I think it's been made for that rock, which is it's a bit more compact for trail runners, ultra runners going forward. I think it's a nice product.
I get the impression with it, looking at how the hardware has been designed. It's got a dedicated quarter turn mount on the back of it,
It is,
which
yeah,
is typical of a bike computer.
yeah,
And you look at it, and it does kind of give it aesthetically looks like a bike
it
computer.
does, yeah,
And I think perhaps my gut feel is that's probably was one of the main reasons for building it,
yeah.
and creating it as a product because it's that bit smaller than some of the other ones that they do.
Well, all their three smaller GPS devices had that quad lock on the
They have
back.
that
It's only
quad
the
lock, do they? Right.
Adventurer has
Right.
nothing on the back, which is the bigger one. But the Terror, the Rock, and yeah, the other one has that quad lock on the back.
It was interesting because the bit I was a bit unsure about. I wasn't sure like how easy the OS maps were going to be to use because I know they're a raster map,
Yeah.
so you're not going to get like high definition quality from it. But I was surprised at just how good the actual image quality is and how easy it is to use and zoom in and out and move around the map and how quickly it renders, which is they've obviously got the processor
Yeah.
working really well inside of that unit because to be able to a map that's got that much detail on it to be able to render it that quickly, it must have a pretty powerful processor inside it.
Hmm.
So yeah, I mean, battery life was really good. For such a small unit with a screen of that size to be able to get like what I think it'll do like 18 hours if you
Yeah.
use if you use the multi GNSS
Yeah. Yeah.
setting. But I think
That's with
what
the
I
screen
did
on
for the
all the
race,
time as well. The other thing as well is they TuneApp always give you that time with the screen on all the time. Whereas as you
it's that
rightly
worst
say,
case
nobody ever
scenario.
has that. So why would you have your screen on when it's in your pocket? You just press that button, it blanks the screen. And that was the key thing I found with started using the TuneApp. Actually, it's saying I'm going to get 18 hours of battery life, but I'm actually getting 24 hours of battery life.
Yeah,
That's
because you're
unusual.
turning the screen
Yeah.
off.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think also like I like the fact you've got the flexibility that if you don't want to use the multi GNSS, i.e., you can choose three different satellite systems for it to flick between. You can go and choose just to use GPS, for example, so the American satellite system,
Hmm.
and actually that just helps improve or it reduces battery drain by. So what I did for the race is because again I knew I had my watch and that was more there as my backup if I needed it. I was happy having it on GPS because I didn't need pinpoint precision accuracy. I just needed it as a reassurance if my watch either I wasn't quite sure what the watch was telling me. I just pull it out and double check it and could see it on the map. I could see features on the OS map that I wouldn't be able to see on my watch. So it having it on GPS was like perfect, really. And then obviously turning the screen off. I think I did plug it in at each of the checkpoints, maybe 15, 20 minutes just to top it up. But it lasted the full 47
Brilliant.
hours by just doing that. So I'm hoping like, people who are watching this who are thinking about getting one, don't be, I would encourage people not to be put off by the battery if they want to use it for longer events, because you can absolutely, optimize the amount of battery that you can get out of it just by giving a bit of consideration to the settings and having the ability to charge it even mid-activity. So
Mm,
yeah,
fantastic.
it's brilliant.
So before we finish off, and you can tell us what your plans are for the future, we're going to talk about 15 miles to go. 15 miles to go,
Mm.
coming over the top of the Cheviots. You were flying across the flagstones, and
Yeah, I managed to roll my ankle.
wow,
So it's the one thing I didn't bring it up in any of the like interviews and stuff after the race because I think people probably knew because they could see me hobbling around, so I was being asked about it. But yeah, so it was after Hut 1. So between Hut
okay,
1 and Hut 2, I don't remember exactly where it was, but I think from Hut 1 to the finish is 15 miles, thereabouts. And
mhm,
you get to Hut 2 with about 7 miles to go.
yeah,
So it was somewhere between 15 miles to go and 7 miles to go. And I think it was after Windy Gale,
okay, hmm,
but before you climb up onto the
so
Cheviot,
yeah,
or well, you don't get all the way onto the Cheviot, do you? You actually take
yeah,
the
yeah,
left
yeah,
before you never actually
yeah,
summit the Cheviot.
exactly right, yeah,
It was somewhere between there. There was there was still snow on the ground in places. It
Yeah.
was quite strange over the sheepies because the first part of it, after you climb up out of
Burness.
Burness, was just, it was like just being on the West Pennines, boggy, wet, cold, but not really any snow. But then after Hut 1 and going over Windy Isle, there was still lots of snow drifts that
Yeah.
obviously hadn't thawed. Um, and it was cold because at that point it was like 2 in the morning. I was there roughly. And I don't know actually quite how I did it, but I must have just misplaced my foot on the edge of one of those
Hmm.
piers because there was
Hmm.
some snow, there was a bit of ice. And as I went over, I kind of put my running pole, because I had my running poles out. I
Hmm.
had some Black Diamond carbon Z poles that I really love. And I put it out to stop myself falling over. All my weight, because I was knackered, all my weight went onto the pole and it just went snap. And I was like, I don't think I'd realised I'd hurt my ankle at
Yeah.
that point, because all I was thinking is, oh my God, them poles cost me like 120 quid. I can't believe I've snapped it. So I was like more miffed off about the pole than I was about my ankle. And it was then, I then kind of got myself together. I was like, right, well, I can't use that pole now. So I kind of folded it up, put it into my little, my waist thing that I've
Hmm.
carried them in, one pole. And I set off, oh, that don't feel so good. Like, and then I realised I'd done something to my ankle. I think a combination of tiredness, fatigue, aching all over anyway. I've not quite realised the severity of it. And I thought, I'll see if I can run it off. And I very quickly realised I wasn't going to run it off. And the frustrating thing was I was still moving
Hmm.
well. I was moving really well still.
Yeah.
Like I was still able to run quite comfortably. So not then being able to run was really frustrating.
Hmm.
And it was a case of I was like, right, well, I mean, in hindsight, looking back now with how sore and how bad it was, I realised within about 10 minutes it was bad because my,
Hmm.
my ankle had swollen up on both sides to the
Right.
point
Okay.
where even in the middle of the night, looking down at it with my head torch, I could
Hmm.
see how swollen it was.
Hmm.
And I was kind of like, this isn't good. Like, I'm just going to have to walk. And I think under any other circumstances, even had I been, maybe 20 miles earlier, where there was like 30 miles to go, I'd have probably not been able to carry on.
Yeah.
But it was one of those where I was computing it in my head and I was like, right, at this pace, walking, I'm probably going to have to walk on it for 5 hours,
Yeah.
roughly. Working on the basis of like 2.5 mile an hour, roughly. And I thought that was still like, that would probably been a bit favourable there, walking that fast. Um, and it just got worse. It just got worse. And I got to Hut 2. I don't know how I got down, because after you climb
You
up
go
onto
to,
the
yeah,
Shavia,
then you drop down to
it's
Hutch. It's
quite
very,
a
very
it's
steep.
quite a
Yeah. Yeah.
techie, and there was a lot of snow there.
Hmm.
And you obviously you can't see Hut 2. Well,
No.
I couldn't because it was the middle of the night and I couldn't see any head torches. It was absolutely killing me. It was excruciating pain. It was like awful, and I was desperate to run, but I couldn't. And I went into Hut 2, and the lady who was in there was the medic, and she
Yeah.
said, "Listen, do you want me to have a look at it?" And I said, "Listen, if I take my shoe off now, I ain't going back on again." And she looked at it and she went, "Yeah, keep it on," because it was, you could just see how bad it
Yeah.
was. Um, and I knew I had to get over the shill. And again, it was a long time ago since I went over there, so I hadn't quite realised how steep the climb is up there. I mean, who put that there? Whose
I
idea
know.
was it to put that
I
on the
know.
Pennine Way? I
Yeah.
mean, it's
Did
just.
you have a cup of tea or coffee at Hut too or not? Did you have a hot drink or not?
They give me a coffee, yeah. They did me a
Oh,
coffee,
that was my
and I knew
best cup of coffee in the whole my whole life was there. Do you know, kind of because I was expecting nothing. Hut 1 there was nothing. Yeah,
they
not
did me one at Hut
anything.
One as well. I had one at
Oh,
Hut
did they?
One.
There was nothing
Yeah,
hot
I
when
got
I
on
was there,
there.
and I got like nothing since Bellingham. And then suddenly I'm coming in thinking, well, there's going to be nothing here because actually it's top of the College Valley. They're not going to get anything. And a lovely woman came out and said, "Hiya, Johnny, all right?" I'm like, "Yeah, do you want a tea or a coffee?" Or what? Tea or a coffee? I'll sit here and have a tea. So
Brilliant.
my high point of the whole of the spine race was a cup of coffee at the top of the College Valley at Hut 2. And I went, that was my high point. And they just boiled it in a jet boiler. And about
Brilliant.
30 seconds, I'm like, yeah, you got to get your mug out. I'll get my mug out. The first time I've used it, but it was the best cup of coffee ever. It was brilliant.
She said that to me. She said, "Oh, you need to get your mug out." And I was like, you know what? I really could do with a cup of coffee right now, because I was
Fantastic.
miffed off. Because I wasn't moving as efficiently or as
Yeah,
quickly. I'd gone cold.
yeah,
So I felt like a warm drink would do me good, and it did. And then I hiked it up onto the shill, and then I was like, and then obviously once you've gone over the shill and you kind of hit the main track,
yeah,
then to run along the edge of the valley down to Kirk Yethan, I was just like, I tried running a few times and I'd manage about like 10 meters and I'd have to stop. And I kind of was like, I knew the race was in the bag when I did it, because I knew even then I knew I was probably, because they told me at Bellingham I was 13 miles in front, and I
Yeah.
was like, well, I was just doing the math. I was thinking, if even if people are going at 2.5 miles an hour, which is good at that at that stage in the race, that's like, you're talking like a 5-6 hour lead. The reality
Yes.
of it is, I'd have to do something really bad, even something as bad as twisting my ankle as bad as I did. I thought, I'm not, you know, I can hike it in, but I
Yeah.
still wanted to run because I wanted to still go as fast as I could.
Yeah.
And at that point, I actually, as it transpired, I probably, if I hadn't have done my ankle, I probably wouldn't have been far off Joe's time from last
Yeah.
year.
Hmm.
But I reckon that took me at least an hour and a half to 2 hours longer than it would have done had it, because I was moving so well up until the point of doing it. It massively slowed me down.
Hmm.
Um, and I think I was frustrated as much as anything, because even though I knew I was probably going to win, and I knew, like, I still wanted.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe it's the runner
No.
in me just wants to
Hmm.
run. I don't want to
Hmm.
walk. I want to run.
Hmm.
Um, and
And after
I
you've
just
done
couldn't.
so much, it must be so frustrating because actually, I've done so well, and then suddenly, what? It's
Yeah.
just short distance to go, and you
It was it
accident.
was it was the
It's just,
one downer from the entire thing, because then when I got back and I got to the finish, I just, got fed, and there's loads of media and they want to talk to you and ask you questions, and then people are like, do you want to come do this podcast and stuff? And like, I had a shower, and then I kind of sat down, and then kind of, it was probably about 2 or 3 hours afterwards, once all the dust had settled, I said, listen, could one of the medics just have a look at my ankles, because it's really, really sore? And she came, and she was, luckily, she was amazing, this lady.
mm,
She was, I think she was a trauma nurse, and she was one of the
right,
volunteers, but her job was a trauma nurse.
right.
So she looked at it, she did a full assessment, and she said, listen, like, I think you need to go and get it x-rayed, because it could well be fractured or broken,
Mm-hmm,
because that's
hmm.
how it's presenting to me. So I was like, oh God, don't tell me that, sort of thing. And amazingly, like, I wanted to wait and see the in who were second, just to meet them, because
Yeah,
I'd
yeah.
not seen them since 47 hours before. So I think they came in about 6 hours after me. It was about maybe 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So I kind of had a chat with both of them too. They came in together. Um, really nice fellas. I had a really good chat with them. And then one of the volunteers offered to drive me to Berwick Infirmary.
Hmm.
So she put me in a car with all of my stuff, my 20 kilo drop bag, my pack from the race, and me hobbling along. She took me to the infirmary, and because it wasn't like an A&E, they saw me really quickly. They x-rayed it, and the lady just said, it's too swollen. We can't actually see enough to know if it is broken or not, because you've. And she said, I don't know if they're that swollen because you've just spent 48 hours on your feet, or if it's because you've actually got a trauma.
Yeah, yeah,
And I said, well, I don't know. So she said, what we'll do is we'll put you in a boot to err on the side of caution.
yeah.
So they stuck me in this boot. The lady who took me, I said, listen, you go back, go and help out the people that are coming in. I'll make my way home. So then I left Berwick Infirmary with my wife and said, right, I need to make my way home now. So there was a train coming at Berwick station about 15 minutes after I'd spoken to her. And I don't know if it's like
I know. Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
it's just over the
It
road.
is not
But
that far from it. Yeah.
I've got this. I've got my 20. I've got my massive blooming drop bag that's got all my kit in it. My
Yeah.
running pack over the other shoulder, and I've got this blooming boot on my
Mm.
foot, and I'm hobbling across Berwick to get to this. And I thought, the irony of it, I've just done 48 hours on my feet, and now I'm trying to run to catch a train, and I bloody missed it. I
Oh
missed it.
no! Oh no!
And I messaged my wife and said, "Can you believe it? The irony, I couldn't get there fast enough." So I had to wait for the next one, and then luckily I got a train down. I had to change at York, changed at York, back, got a train over to Manchester, and my wife and my daughter came and picked me up from Manchester on the Wednesday night. So I got home. I don't know, it was about 11 o'clock on Wednesday night, I think it was.
You just slept. Did you get plenty of sleep? Did it take a few
I,
days to recover, or not really? Or
it's funny, because you kind of like, I'm part of all, like, the spine groups and stuff, and you hear
yeah,
all these stories about people who,
yeah,
they talk about like what the recovery is like, and I think, um, in a way, I think I might have said this to you. I think doing my ankle was probably a blessing in disguise
Hmm.
because about 2, 3 days after, by Friday, I, without a doubt in my mind, had I not have done the ankle, I'd have been running that weekend
Hmm.
because I felt good. My body didn't feel broken. I felt physically and mentally okay. I was a bit tired. I was still catching up on sleep, I think, because I've not slept for 2 days. But my body felt good. But my ankle was just, I mean, I could never have done anything on it.
Yeah, yeah.
So in
So
a
it
way, I
made you
think
rest.
it made me rest. And actually, I think that's been a good thing because
Yeah.
I think with all the training I'd done for the 3 months leading up to it, and then the impact that the race has on you, I probably was carrying a lot of deep fatigue, even though I probably couldn't feel it.
Uh-huh.
And I think having had now, a month of, you know, I did not do nothing.
Hmm.
I was back on my bike in the garage like probably the week after. So I had a full week. I didn't do anything. And then the following Wednesday, I went on Zwift on my static bike in the garage, did a bit of cycling, got back on my bike outdoors, and then it's really only been probably the last week that I've actually started running again, and it's
Hmm.
good. The ankle's okay now, so
I'm
I
going to
feel
tell you
like
this funny
I'm.
story of when I did it. This is quite an amusing. I've not said this in the podcast before. Was the Tuesday before my spine race? I had an infection in my cheek. My cheek swelled up. So I went to the dentist. When I went to the doctors, it's a long story. They went to the dentist and they gave me these antibiotics. They said, "We want to see you next Tuesday." I said, "You won't be seeing me next Tuesday." He said, "Why? I'm doing the spine race." I said, "You won't do the spine race." I said, "I'm doing the spine race." She said, "Well, when
Getting.
do you finish?" He said,
I love
"Well,
that.
worst case scenario, Thursday." He said, "Well, I'm booking in for Friday." I said, "No problem." So the day after, I was back in the dentist, which is Hexham, which is an hour away, and I got my wife to run me there, drop me off the door.
The day after doing the spine.
A day after doing the spine, I had to go to
Oh
the
my
dentist
word, John,
because
that's
she was
incredible.
really strict. She said, "No, no." I said, "You'll be there on Tuesday." I said, "I will not be here on Tuesday. You've got to be here on Tuesday." I won't be here on Tuesday, I guarantee you.
So you, so
So
you,
I
so were you
finished
in
on
pain
Thursday
for
night.
the
I
race
finished,
then?
yeah, I was preparing for the race. God, I've not said this publicly. They actually thought on the Tuesday, they thought I had cancer in my mouth. They said, "Oh, okay." And they said, "We think you got cancer. You got to see the dentist." And the dentist said, "Oh, it's not cancer." Anyway, it was it ended up being a blocked saliva gland, which has
Right.
now been sorted. It was a saliva gland kept getting blocked, and
Yeah.
then the saliva gets stuck in,
Inflamed.
inflamed, went to the dentist, and it's happened 2 or 3 times. And it happened the Tuesday before the spine race. And the dentist,
Wow.
like, real stickly, said, "You come in next Tuesday." "I'm not be here Tuesday." I said, "Unless I'm dead, I'll be out on the pen highway doing the spine race." He said, "When would you finish it?" "Oh, worst case scenario, Thursday." I said, "Well, I see you Friday morning." Then, "Well, really?"
I'll
"You
tell
want to
you
see me
what, fair
Friday
play to you
morning?"
that. Fair
And
play to you for
so
getting there for Friday.
I had no recovery. And then the funny thing was on the Friday, I then went to the dentist on the Friday. And then we were supposed to be going out with some friends, which I thought was the following Saturday, was actually the Saturday night. So on the Saturday, a friend came to see me, and then Jane, my wife, said, "Do you realize we're going out with Ashley and Philip tonight for a meal?" I'm going, "No way." I said, "I've not had a chance to recover yet." So we went out with this meal on the Saturday night. And yeah, it was actually, it was superb. It's actually, because we went out for a meal in Rothby, where we're based. And the
Yeah.
local pipe band, the chief piper works for, well, is a volunteer for Northern National Park Mountain Rescue Team. So
Yeah.
we were sat down at the end of this restaurant, and the local piping band had been out for a day on a drink piping. So as they finished off, I stood up from the restaurant, and the chief piper saw me. He said, "Oh," he said, he stopped. Said, "Whoa, whoa," the whole pub. He said, "Quiet, quiet. We're quite honoured. We've got a special guest in tonight, John Monks." From Shepherd's Walks, has raised £2,500 doing the Spine Challenge in North in the last week, and he's in the pub just 48 hours after he's finished. So this final uh, song or tune is for John for raising this money after finishing the Spine Challenge in North. So they
That's
all they
brilliant.
all they all clapped their hands in this pub, and the pipe band played this final song for me, and then I kind of hobbled out, a little bit less glamorous than you, so I hobbled out of it at the end. So mine
Oh,
was
that's
quite a
really
dramatic.
good.
Dentist one day, out for a meal the following day, of which the pipe band piped me out to the pub at the end. He was like, "Oh, time your bedtime, 10 o'clock." So
Yeah, no, no, it is. I'm definitely,
so
no, I
I
definitely
quite an
like my sleep.
exciting end to it there. So yeah, yeah. So I was in the dentist the
Yeah,
following morning, so I know exactly.
it's
Yeah, this trauma you finish it. I'm there, but you think, "Oh, my real life just starts again now, doesn't
it does, and
it?"
I think that's the bit that I think, in a way, that the ankle, probably for me anyway, it kind of it made me rest, and I
Yeah,
think I really did need to do that. And I think I'll benefit from having had that rest as I start to build up towards
yeah.
like my next races and what I'm going to hopefully do this year. But I think, it was interesting, like, because you hear all these, like say, all these stories about people who talk about like night sweats and
Yeah.
all these other things. And I think maybe maybe had one night where I was a bit like that. Maybe I
Yeah.
think it was the Thursday or the Friday night.
Yeah.
But apart from that one night where I didn't sleep great, I've just seem to have got back into normal routine.
Fantastic.
I've had a bit of like numbness in a couple of my toes, but again, I think that's quite par for the course. After
Hmm.
your feet get a bit swollen, your nerves take a bit of a battering in your
Yeah.
feet, and actually they take a bit longer to heal than anything else. Nerves are renowned for taking a bit longer, I think,
Yeah.
to repair after they've been
Long
put
haul
through
like
what
that.
the spine probably puts them through. So I've not got
Brilliant.
trench foot though, so I was glad about that, because I kept hearing these stories about people saying that they get. I think
Trench foot,
Rory
yeah.
Rory said it to me when we did the recce. I don't know if he was trying to scare me or not, but he kept telling me all these stories, and I was like, "Man, will you stop it? Like
Yeah.
you put scaring the bejesus out of me."
We had to soak our feet in disinfectant at the end for trench foot. That's what they made us do. So we got to the end, we had to put our feet in disinfectant. Because I wanted to
Really?
just go home. And I
Oh right,
said,
so he wasn't
oh,
just
it's
trying to
no
scare me
story.
then.
So when we got to the end, they said,
I
I
thought he
said,
was
oh
trying to
no.
scare me.
I said, my wife says, I'm just going to go home. She said, no, you can't go home. I said, I can't. I just want to go home. He said, take your feet off, take your shoes off, and just soak your feet in this trench foot. And then I had another curry. I must be a reoccurring theme at that point. But
Nice.
yeah, they made you do it. And you could smell the disinfectant. It's like around your foot and mouth, the disinfectant that you're having to soak your feet in. So there
Oh
you
God.
are.
Well, so
So
maybe I did it. I managed to. Luckily, I've managed to
get
avoid that.
away with that.
Whether I'll
So
be so lucky next year, I don't know. I mean, we'll have to see
yeah.
how it goes. But yeah,
Fantastic. So that
we'll see.
nicely moves on to what's next, really. So you've signed up, or do you get a free play? But you have to pay. Nothing gets for
I
free,
think
do
I've
you?
got. I basically get the equivalent value of the Challenger North for free.
Right.
So I can either do the Challenger North for free, or I can upgrade to the full spine and pay the
Fantastic.
difference, basically.
Okay.
So that's what I'm going to do, which is still, I mean, it's still a lot of money, but
It
it's a
is.
lot cheaper than paying the full amount. That's for sure.
Yeah. So
So yeah,
you're
that was
signed up
really
for that
good.
next year then. So it's
Yeah,
full spine next January.
full spine next January. Try and do, I need to give a bit of thought to preparation. I'm going to build up to it. I've got a couple of other races this year. I'll probably do. I really enjoy my cycling, so I'll be doing the Gralloch, the UCI Gralloch race, which is up in Galloway,
Hmm.
in May. I'm doing Lakeland 50 in June. Got a bit of history with Lakeland 50 because that was my first ultra in 2015. So I'm fitter and stronger than I was then. So I'd like to try to beat my time and be competitive. I do like that distance. 50 miles seems to be like obviously I did all right. I've never done anything as far as the spine, but
Hmm.
I've seemed to have the most success I've had has been around the 50-mile mark.
Hmm.
That seems to be where for me anyway, where I find I excel at that distance. So I'm hoping I can have a good race at Lakeland 50. I'll probably I'll probably do some of the English Fell Championships this year for Horwich,
Brilliant.
wearing my club vest, because I do like the shorter, harder stuff
Hmm.
as well, just to keep the sharpness going.
So how
And
are you
then
going to
yeah,
train for 268 miles then? Have you thought about how you're going to do that? Because are you going to do something similar than what you did this year, or do you think?
yeah.
I don't know how you train for that distance. It's impossible, really, isn't it?
And this is the thing. I think my gut feel is I don't think I could do much more than what I did for the
Yeah.
Challenger North.
Hmm.
But then I also don't know if I need to. I think if I can execute a training block as well, building up to the spine as I have for the Challenger North, I think I'll give myself a good chance, because I think, even at the end of that race, I still felt good. You
Hmm.
know, the prospect of doing 100 miles, another 100 miles is daunting,
Hmm.
without a doubt. But if somebody had said to me, you need to do another 100 miles now, apart from the ankle,
Yeah.
obviously, I could have done. I genuinely believe I could have done. I think I was in good enough shape to have probably done the full spine this year.
Hmm.
But I equally know that there's a different dynamic there, because I cannot get away with not sleeping on the full spine. I will inevitably have to sleep at some point. And I think I need to, that is going to be the thing that I need to take most into account if I want to be
Hmm.
competitive, which I'd like to be. Um, if I
Where you're
want
going
to
to
be
sleep and for how long that
where
is
I'm
going
going
to
to
be.
sleep. And I
Hmm.
think the difficulty is, and I've listened to quite a few podcasts. I've listened to like Kim Collison
Hmm.
about his previous attempts over the last few years, and he's kind of like he talks a lot about the chimp. He's in a
Yeah.
chimp.
Yeah.
And I think I can resonate with that a lot, because I definitely run too hard a lot of the time, and I think Kim, by his own admission, has talked a lot about you know Um, maybe part of the reason that he wasn't successful in previous years is because probably maybe went a bit too hard too early.
Yeah.
And he let the racing chimp inside of him control his race rather than listening to what, he probably, he's listening to he's kind of like thinking with your brain almost and not letting the chimp take over. And I think I was worried about doing that in the Challenger North,
Yeah.
being in a race situation and doing what other people are doing rather than doing what you need to do for yourself. And I think doing the full spine, that could be definitely somewhere where I'd come unstuck. And the sleep thing, I think it could be very tempting to, even though you know you need it, because you're in a race, you think
Not
I'm
go
just going
again.
to carry on because I don't want
Yeah.
to lose
But
places.
then you lose that momentum once you
You
once you're
do,
past it. It's frightening really because once you don't have that sleep and it catches up on you, you
yeah.
just become desperately slow, don't you?
Well, and it's like people say about nutrition, isn't it? They say that if you get to the point where you hit the wall, i.e., you bonk, there's no coming back from it. So
Yeah.
you've got to keep on top of it. And I think the same applies to sleep. I think you've got
Yeah.
to keep on top of it. So I think what I've got to do is, if I want to be successful, I think I need to have a plan. I need to be able to adapt because I think you've got to do that on a race like the Spine. I think there is inevitably nothing's going to go perfect. So you've got to have the self awareness to make good decisions based on the moment and be reactive. And I think when I do that, I need to listen to my body
Hmm.
and not let the chimp take over for sure, which I
Hmm.
could see it doing. So yeah, I think I'll train very similar. I don't think I'll do much different. I don't think I can do much different. Um, and then I just see how it goes, really, I think.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah. And
hope for the
finally,
best.
then is like if somebody's thinking about doing Spine Challenger North or even Spine Challenger South or something around that distance, 100 miles plus, what one point of advice would you give them to help them on that journey?
No, preparation.
Preparation.
Preparation. 100%. I, I mean, people get asked, you listen to podcasts and stuff, and people get asked questions about what's the single biggest, most important thing. And people talk about nutrition, they'll talk about strength and conditioning, But I think regardless of whether you're front, middle, back, wherever you are, I think you have to prepare yourself for a race like that. I think if you neglect preparation and consistency with your training, you basically how does the saying go? If I can't even think of what the analogy is now. So you fail to plan to fail.
Hmm.
And I think part of being successful or achieving your ambitions in a race like that, you can't neglect the
No.
training. And what I found is, for me, it's all about consistency. So having a good routine and week on week, kind of, obviously you sometimes have to adapt. Personal life and things get in the way. Things crop up, and that's inevitable. You might get injured, but consistency.
Yeah.
Consistency is king, I think.
Fantastic. And I think as well that changes your mindset as well, because once you're confident doing those in the longer distances, your whole mindset changes, which I think what you need a lot for the ultra event. We're actually uh, walking or running the Northumberland Coast Path becomes, oh, well, it's just an afternoon out in your case. We're actually, like a decade ago, it had been a 4 days holiday down to
It,
walking the coast, I think.
it's funny, isn't it? Because it's people, when you say what you've done to people, and they almost can't comprehend it because they might struggle to go and run 3 miles or
Mm,
walk 3 miles. And I think what I always say to people is it's relative,
yeah.
and like the reason I'm able to do it, or you're able to do it, is because you prepare yourself for it. So you have a target, you build the conditioning that you need in order to give yourself the best possible chance to succeed. And I think when you do that, I genuinely believe that, and I probably get slated for saying this, but I do genuinely believe that most people have the ability to complete an ultra.
Mhm, mhm.
I know maybe not everybody can be right at the front of races. I'm not saying that, but I think anybody can do that if they're prepared to dedicate and be committed to consistency in training. And I think if you do that and you take it seriously, it's incredible what you can achieve and what your body's capable of doing.
and that can be over a number of years. No, people don't think I'm going to sign up and do it 9 months time. Actually, if you start off at this stage, within a year I'm aiming to do this, within 2 years I'm aiming to do this, and within 3 years, it's amazing how far you can get your fitness and actually how you keep that fitness once you actually get into that journey, isn't it? It's
It
amazing
is.
how, like I say, I started doing these ultras because I interviewed someone on the podcast who's the Spine Challenger South, and I aspired to do that. And it
Yeah.
took me 2 years, and then I did it. Well, actually, it took me 3 years because they didn't let me in the first year. So I went and walked 180 miles just to prove I could do it.
You could do it. Nice.
Because when somebody says you
Like you
can't
do.
do 109 miles, okay, I'll go and do 118 just to
Yeah, I'll
prove
show
that I
you.
can do it. So, and I'll do it in winter as well. So yeah, so that's what I
I do,
did.
I do, I do think you've got to have. I think all people who do the races like the Spine, I think there is a degree of like it's almost like it's your genetic mentality, like how it's like that kind of we're almost wired a bit different perhaps from a mental perspective, but from a physical standpoint, I think anybody can achieve it
Yeah,
if you can get yourself in the right frame of mind to commit yourself to the training for it,
it is.
you can achieve it.
Yeah.
So, but
It's
yeah,
just,
it definitely takes a certain type of mentality to do this type of stuff for sure.
yeah, and I think that helps you in bettering life, though, once you get that mentality within it, because actually
Yeah.
you realize that you can't think of the big picture. You just break down every mile or every step or every 5 miles or every 10 miles or however long is the next checkpoint. Because actually, if you think of the bigger picture, you're just going to go, oh, I can't do this.
I think having had experience of it as well, because I mean, not like one other thing that like people asked me a lot after the race was, even the people who were the guys who were behind me said like, how did you find just being on your own for so long? Because I spent all of that race on
Yeah,
my own, and we not daunted, we not scared, like, and I think some of it was that a lot of it was because I've got confidence in my own ability.
yeah,
I've also had lots of experience of having to be self sufficient. And I think in a race like the Spine, where you are on your own in some of the most remote parts of the country in very extreme conditions, you know, I wouldn't. There wasn't any point where I felt scared. I wasn't
hmm,
intimidated because I believed in the kit that I had, the conditioning that I'd done, my ability to navigate, to look after myself, to be self sufficient. And I think if you can have that confidence and that mind frame, actually that eliminates a lot of doubt and things going wrong because you back yourself, you
yeah,
know. So when people asked me that question, said, "Were you not daunted?" No, I
no,
wasn't. It was horrible. Don't get me wrong; it was hard, but I never ever at any point didn't feel like oh, gosh, I don't know what I'm going to do here. I'm
hmm,
or starting to panic. I was thinking clearly all the time, and I think
fantastic.
that's really important as well.
Superb. So I can't thank you enough, Paul, for joining us on the GPS Training
Pleasure.
Podcast. We so much look forward to dot watching you next January and cheering you on the way. And we might even have a welcome squad of listeners at the end when you complete that. So we'll be certainly dot watching you. And again, if you are doing any other events that we can watch, do drop us an email. We can drop it in our newsletter and this kind of thing. So I know we have
Sure.
a lot of ultra fans on the GPS Training newsletter that goes out on a Friday, and also listen to the podcast because they've lived with our journeys over the time and other people that we've interviewed. So I can't thank you enough. Yeah, it's been a real pleasure. It's been a 1 hour and 37 minutes, which
I
I thought it
know.
would be a decent length, but actually a little bit over what we would normally do. But it's been yeah, it's opened up my eyes, and yeah, and I know it would be a very well received podcast. So yeah,
Oh,
from
good.
everybody here, I can't thank you enough. And yeah,
Pleasure.
thanks for sharing your experiences. And
No,
yeah, very much thank you for joining us on the podcast.
no, thanks ever so much. I appreciate you having me on and
And
really enjoyed it.
everybody listening, if you've got any thoughts or comments, either drop us an email, leave us a comment in the comment box below if you're listening to us on YouTube, and hopefully we can get more great guests like Paul going forward. And hopefully, when he wins the Spine next year, we'll get you back on, Paul.
Yeah, hopefully. Yeah, watch this space.
Fantastic. Thank you, Paul, for joining us. Very much
Cheers, John.
appreciated.
Thanks.